You don't need to win. You don't need to shine brighter than others. You don't need to be ahead to be enough. In a world that's always comparing, competing, chasing, this video is your pause, a chance to understand why real peace doesn't come from rising above, but from stepping out of the race completely. You're not here to prove anything. You're here to bloom in silence, in truth, in your own time. Conflict begins at home. Most of the conflict we experience doesn't come from distant enemies. It starts at home, in the living room, in the kitchen, in the silence between two people who once loved each other, in the unspoken tension between siblings, in the mind. We don't argue with people living across the world. We argue with those closest to us, with our partner, our colleague, our neighbor, our own family. Conflict most of the time isn't born from hatred. It's born from friction, from closeness, from the uncomfortable feeling that someone is standing too near, too close to who we are, too similar, too threatening. Because what we're afraid of deep down is not the other person. It's what their presence awakens in us. Think of two ant colonies, one in Europe, one in Asia. They never fight. They don't even know the other exists. But place them on the same tree and war begins. Not because of evil, not because they hate each other, but because they share space. They compete for the same ground. That's what happens to us too. We don't struggle with strangers. We struggle with people whose victories feel like they take something away from us, whose light reminds us of our own doubts, whose success feels too close to what we wish we had, and so we compete. Not openly, sometimes not even consciously, but we compare, we measure, we tense up, we feel less, or we try to feel more. And in that game, we lose ourselves. Because the truth is, when your peace depends on being more than someone else, you're already not free. Buddhism doesn't tell you to run away from life. It invites you to see clearly, to observe the impulse to react and choose not to recognize the subtle games of the ego and step aside. Conflict begins at home, but peace can begin there too. Comparison, the poison of proximity. We rarely compare ourselves to people far away. We compare ourselves to those who are close, too close. Our friends, our siblings, our co-workers, the people we grew up with, the ones who remind us of who we could have been or who we think we should be. Comparison doesn't hurt because someone else is doing better. It hurts because we believe we should be there too, because we see a part of ourselves reflected in them. And that reflection stings, not because it's true, but because it touches a wound that was already there. When someone you barely know achieves something, you might admire them, but when someone close to you shines, it can trigger something darker. A quiet discomfort, a subtle sense of not being enough. It's not that we want them to fail. We just wish their success didn't remind us of our own delays, our own confusion, our own forgotten dreams. This is the poison of proximity, the pain of seeing in others what we're still searching for in ourselves. But comparison doesn't just distort how we see others. It distorts how we see ourselves. It pulls us away from our path. It makes us question our pace, our process, our purpose. It turns life into a race that no one really wins because the finish line keeps moving. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from craving, the desire to be something other than what we are. And comparison is that craving in disguise. Every time we compare ourselves to someone else, we reject our journey. We doubt our value. We step out of our center and into a mental world that's never satisfied. The truth is, we're not supposed to grow at the same time. We're not meant to bloom the same way. What makes someone else shine doesn't dim your light, and what you haven't reached yet doesn't mean you're behind. It just means your rhythm is different. Letting go of comparison isn't easy, but it's possible. It begins by noticing it gently, without shame. By remembering that your worth doesn't depend on catching up. It depends on showing up for yourself. Every day, no matter where you are, when you stop looking sideways, you start walking forward. And that's when life finally becomes your own. Competition and territory, the outdated instinct. Long ago, competition was survival. Those who hunted better lived longer. Those who protected their land kept their families safe. Territory meant food, safety, future. And so deep inside the nervous system, competition became instinct, a reaction, a defense, a warning sign. But today the landscape has changed and the instinct has not. We no longer fight for food or shelter. Now we fight for validation, for followers, for attention, for status. Territory isn't physical anymore. It's emotional, it's symbolic. And yet the body reacts the same way. Someone speaks louder in a meeting and you feel threatened. Someone receives praise and your chest tightens. Someone posts their perfect life online and you suddenly question yours. It's not life or death, but it feels like it. This is the outdated instinct at work, a primitive system firing in a modern world. The brain still thinks it's protecting you, but really it's exhausting you because you're not trying to survive. You're trying to matter. You're trying to prove you're enough. And that kind of competition never ends. There's always someone with more clarity, more followers, more success, more peace even. The more you chase it, the further it slips away. Buddhism doesn't say you shouldn't try. It says try from the right place, not from fear, not from lack, not to prove your worth, but to express it. When you compete to be seen, you're acting from a wound. When you act from presence, you're no longer in the game. You've stepped out of the battlefield and into your own truth. This isn't about weakness, it's about evolution. Knowing that the impulse to dominate, to outperform, to conquer, belongs to a version of humanity we're meant to outgrow. You don't need territory when you have presence. You don't need to win when you've made peace with who you are. Let the old instinct dissolve. Let the new clarity rise. Because freedom doesn't live at the top. It lives in the quiet decision to no longer need the race. The ego trap. Always wanting to be more or at least not less. There's a part of us that can't bear to feel less capable, less seen, less loved, less important. That part has a name. It's called the ego. The ego is not evil. It's a survival structure. It was built to help you feel safe, accepted, recognized. As a child, you learned that when you achieved, people smiled. When you pleased others, they approved. When you performed well, you were told you were good. So the ego memorized the pattern. To be valued, I must be more. But as you grow, that pattern becomes a prison. You start chasing worth through comparison. You start reacting when someone else succeeds. You start protecting an image of yourself instead of simply being yourself. And without realizing it, you lose your freedom. Not because someone took it, but because you gave it away in exchange for approval. The ego wants to be more admired, more respected, more powerful. But sometimes it just wants one thing, not to be less. And that's where the pain lives, in the fear of being invisible, in the anxiety of not measuring up, in the subtle panic of being forgotten. That fear drives people to compete, to pretend, to overachieve, to smile when they're breaking inside, to post when they feel empty, to try to prove they're okay, even when they're not. But Buddhism offers a different mirror. It says don't destroy the ego, just see it. See how it moves, see how it feeds on fear, see how it reacts when someone else is praised or when you're not. And in that awareness, something shifts. You realize that your worth isn't a prize. It's not something you earn by outperforming others. It's something you remember by coming home to yourself. You don't have to be more. You don't have to protect the image. You just have to be honest. And from that honesty comes peace. Let the ego relax. It's tired. It's been running for years, trying to be enough, trying to stay ahead. But you are already enough. Not because you've proven anything, but because you exist. And that, quietly, simply, is everything. Seeing the game without playing it. The Buddhist view. There is a kind of wisdom that doesn't fight the world. It simply steps aside. Most people are trapped in games they don't even know they're playing. Who's more successful? Who's more enlightened? Who's more healed, more spiritual, more free? It's all the same game, just with different masks. And the rules are always changing. The ego wants to win, but the mind rarely knows what winning really means. So we chase validation, we chase admiration, we chase peace as if it were a trophy. But the more we chase, the more distant it feels. Buddhism offers no prizes, no final stage, no applause, just awareness, just the quiet ability to see clearly and stop reacting, to see the game but not play it, to recognize the impulse to compare, to compete, to respond and let it pass like a cloud. Not by force, but with clarity, with softness, with space. You start to see people differently. The ones who compete are tired. The ones who attack are scared. The ones who constantly compare are hurting. And you start to understand something vital. Not everyone needs to change. You just need to stop engaging, not with hate, not with superiority, but with stillness, with presence, with a kind of quiet dignity that doesn't require defense. There's no need to prove anything when you're grounded in who you are. There's no need to win when you no longer feel like you're losing. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you free. Because to stop playing the game consciously, lovingly, is the most powerful move you can make. Evolved wisdom from rivalry to inner freedom. For most of human history, evolution meant survival. Be faster, be stronger, be smarter, be first. It made sense in a world where food was scarce, danger was constant, and being less could mean being left behind. But we're no longer fighting to survive. We're fighting to be seen. And that changes everything. Today, real evolution is not about rising above others. It's about rising above the need to compare. It's not about being the best, Gore. It's about being whole. Being so at peace with yourself that you no longer need to compete to feel valuable. Inner freedom begins when you realize that nothing outside you can complete you. No recognition, no victory, because all of that is temporary. And the peace you're looking for has nothing to do with being more. Buddhism calls us to evolve not outward, but inward, to recognize that the deepest power isn't in controlling the world, it's in mastering the self. Not through force, but through understanding. Not by conquering others, but by letting go of the need to. To move from rivalry to inner freedom is not a leap. It's a quiet decision made again and again, to respond instead of react, to listen instead of prove, to be instead of perform. And from that space, something powerful is born. Not dominance, not applause, but presence. And presence is enough. Don't compete, just bloom. You were not born to win. You were not born to outperform, to compare, to chase shadows that move every time you get close. You were born to be, and in that simple truth, to bloom. But blooming takes courage in a world obsessed with race, because blooming means standing still when others run. It means growing inward when the world screams for outward success. It means trusting silence over noise, presence over attention, authenticity over applause. Most people are exhausted, not from doing too much, but from trying to be something they're not. They bend themselves to fit, to impress, to meet expectations that were never theirs to begin with. And all the while, the voice of their own soul gets quieter, until they no longer remember what peace feels like. The modern world tells you to brand yourself, to climb, to compare, to stand out. But the truth is, the deepest freedom comes when you no longer need to be anyone else. When you stop chasing approval like air. When you stop shrinking every time someone else shines. When you stop trying to earn your place in a world that was never meant to be a battlefield. Look around. The trees are not competing. The mountains are not louder than each other. The moon is not jealous of the sun. Everything in nature grows in harmony, not in rivalry. And you are part of that same nature. Not separate, not above, not below. Part of. The flower doesn't bloom for attention. It blooms because that's what it was made for. Not to be seen, but to be whole. And when it opens, even in silence, something in the world changes. Something shifts quietly just by being fully itself. That's your invitation to stop performing, to stop proving, to stop tying your worth to a number, a title, a comparison, or a timeline. Let go of the scoreboard. Let go of the image. Let go of the invisible race you've been running in your head for years, and ask yourself softly, without fear, what would my life look like if I no longer needed to compete? Who would I become if I no longer had to be more? Buddhism teaches this through stillness, through awareness, through the gentle unraveling of all the layers you thought you needed in order to be enough. Until you finally remember you were never lacking, you were never late, you were never behind, you were simply becoming. So let others chase, let others fight, let others measure their lives by how much they've won. You slow down, listen, turn inward, and begin to grow, not for the world, but for your own soul. Don't compete, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know it's no longer necessary. You've outgrown the battlefield, and now it's time to bloom. Even if no one is watching, even if no one understands, even if it takes time, even if it feels unfamiliar, bloom anyway, because that's your nature, because that's your truth, because that's your quiet revolutions. If these words found something inside you, let them stay. Don't rush to share. Don't rush to do anything. Let this message breathe through you for a while. And if something softened inside your chest, if even for a few seconds you felt the weight lift, you're already changing. Leave a comment below and tell me, what are you ready to stop competing with? And if this kind of clarity brings you peace, subscribe. There's more truth, more silence, more space to remember who you are. We're not here to race. We're here to return, together, slowly and fully.